Okay, how's it going, everybody? I thought I'd make another video. Um, so I noticed um, that this DAW, an industry standard, is a very hot topic. Just like with recording studios closing was a hot topic. You know, the whole music industry is a hot topic because all of it's related. And some people probably will probably even think that the only people that are in the music industry would be like record labels with record executives, people working at a record label, big name artists, you know, that are doing the red carpet and going to Grammy shows and things like that. You know, they're producers or recording engineers, or they're artists and producers and working with labels, and artists are doing these big giant concerts and in the recording studio recording their albums and all that. When in actuality, even if you are playing in a local band and you're gigging in local clubs around your town, and that band is being paid by clubs to gig in these clubs, you know, we call them top 40 bands or whatever, and there's a lot of them. And a lot of these top 40 band cover bands even record themselves on video and put it on YouTube and things like that. That's still all the music business, music industry, because it's all about entertainment. It's just that some people reap the rewards of the entertainment world more than others. And I've heard a few when I listen to some people's channels, and they'll say, yeah, I've been doing this for 10 years, or I've been doing this for 15 years or 20 years. I'm like, man, y'all make me feel old. Because I think one guy said he's been doing it for over 20 years. And I'm like, well, you think about it, it's 2025, over 20 years. I mean, you started in 2005. And I'm like, man, I feel old. Because I got started as a musician. I actually started playing my first instrument is trumpet. I got started in 1980. So I was 10 years old. So that what does that tell you? I started playing keyboards at 12 in 1982. So what does that tell you? I started sequencing and working with a 4-track in 1986. I was working in the recording studios in the early 90s. So I'm like, man, that's well over 30 plus years. So I'm like, you know, whatever the case. And, you know, I keep my little binder, and I'm not saying, there are some people on on their YouTube channels that got legitimate credits, you know, that's worked with, they've worked with a lot of artists. There's quite a few people, like for me, my story, because I was being in the Army and the Army Reserves and all that too, but a short story is I met a guy. His name was Grover. He owned his own independent. He had his own independent record label and production company, and he built his own recording studios. One of the first recording studios I got to working out of quite a few. And work with him and using the knowledge that I had, knowing music theory and being a musician that I am, I got on board with that production team, which led to the group. We had it called A Different Taste that actually got, we actually had some quite a bit of radio success. So I keep it in this binder. This is a binder of charts of different cities that were playing. It was thankful to some people that got these artists that got the group of the music that we did in the group and all that. That got them on, that got them on the radio. We were playing, but the name of the group was called A Different Taste. That's a picture of the studio. That I used to work. It was in Waco, Texas, but that's the inside of the recording studio. that I used to work in. But anyhow, it was nice to hear the the seed, and to see that the girls that of a different taste were being written up in magazines like Right On Magazine and Word Up Magazine, and they were getting all this publicity and opening for different artists such as Brandy and All For One and these different artists, and so forth. But anyhow, it was nice to see them getting right. I mean, this is some of the articles out of some of the different magazines, but it's called A Different Taste. That's just a little bit of credibility, to talk about. When I talk about this stuff, it is a long process to this whole thing. But anyhow, I just wanted to throw, so that way I'm not. Let's talk about these DAWs, since it's such a hot topic. Yes. What made Pro Tools become, when they say the industry standard, what made Pro Tools become an industry standard was Digital Design was able to market to recording studios and recording schools that this DAW all these schools and commercial studios are going to need a system that people can use that can go from it's kind of like if you go from a studio out of New York and you needed to go to a studio in California, they could take the session files, stem files, or whatever you want to call it, and they could upload it from out of New York and go right to LA or whatever, load the files in, and the session would work. And this became universal. This became an industry. This is why they said it became the industry standard, because it was pretty much in all pro studios. Now, pro studios, what a lot of studios were doing was either they were recording, and the thing is, it was Digital Design, and you needed their gear for it to work. This was a brilliant marketing strategy, because Digital Design and their interfaces and everything else, it wouldn't work with a basic interface or computer system like a PC or earlier Apple, Macintosh. We call them Macs for short. They're really Macintoshes. Apple and Macintosh, they merged as one, Macintosh, being an Apple product. But PCs and Macs were not like they are today. So really, the standard of what we can do technology wise, as far as DAWs, plugins, audio editing and everything, has only been around for about 15 years. Believe it or not, it is not old at all. So if you go back pre-DAW days, either you were recording on tape to tape machines until ADATs came out, and Tascams and Fostex, and then they started coming out with hard disk recorders, like the Elisa's hard disk recorder, the Tascam hard disk recorders, and then they would come out with all kinds of hard disk recorders. Some of these hard disk recorders were eight tracks or whatever, but before, the standard was still tape machines, because the standard was still a commercial studio, and with the commercial studio and your main system that everything is going to go through would be a console. It didn't matter what brand you got. Some consoles have more options than others, like an SSL would have dynamics, gates, and it would have gates and compressors on each channel. Most consoles don't offer that. You would literally insert an external piece of gear on that channel. So you would go to these commercial studios that would have lots and lots of racks of outboard gear. We just call them plug-in software. Software is just the plug-in version of that. But the old system was that pretty much 90+% of all your all your artists, record label contracted artists and groups and bands went to a commercial studio, and they had to, all these artists on these different record labels had to compete to get booking time. But because these artists are well known, it's like, for example, you would have, if you had AC/DC booking a recording studio, or you would have Prince booking, or whatever the case may be, or Madonna, or you would have, all these, and it didn't matter. It was lots of genres of artists. You had R&B artists booking these studios. You had rock bands. You had jazz bands. You had all these different genres, and some had to fly overseas. So that's the reason why that's why it was so many commercial studios. And some commercial studios, based on the price of what it costs to build a control room and a live room, and sometimes because they were, booking so many artists, they would keep building more live room and more control rooms, because they were just booking artists. And the typical setup would be, not everyone could put an SSL console in every single room, like the Record Plant or Larrabee Studios or whatever. Sometimes they would have to buy these consoles, and sometimes, and then they would buy different consoles because some artists wanted that sound of console. It was a lot of times the biggest thing about getting these artists in these commercial studios were simply about what gear and how this gear sounds. And producers and all that and engineers knew this. So some commercial studios would have in-house engineers like Sunset Sound, with the Joe Ciccarelli or whatever the case. And then or Larrabee Studios would have engineers like Jason Joshua, or Manny American, or Dave Pensato. They would have engineers like that. Or you would have, the Power Station out of New York would have engineers like Bob Clearmountain, Chris Lord Alge, and so forth. Then you would have floating engineers that would just go and get hired to go to these different studios, and they would go and so forth. And some of these engineers would work on, they prefer, if they were using like a vintage Neve console, like what East West Recording Studio would have, like a vintage Neve, an 8068 or whatever. They're used to that console, so they would prefer to work on that type of console, versus some of these engineers would prefer to work on a newer Neve, like a Neve VR or 88 or something. And then, of course, these studios were still booking not only for artists, but they were booking for like rentals to bring in like orchestras and so forth. So the standard was the most important thing they would look at, other than the outboard gear and the rooms that they're going to record in, was the console. They would look, okay, oh yeah, he's got a Trident Legacy, it's got a Trident, or an 88 Trident or whatever. There's an API Legacy, or there's a Neve, or there's an API, or there's a MCI console, or there's a Helios or a Harrison. So, and the most standard thing that everyone recorded to was tape machines. Some people like the Atari. Some people, you would have MCI but the Rolls Royce of tape machines were Studers. If you had a Studer 800 or something like that, 24 track or whatever, that was preferred because everyone was recording to tape. So, and then some recording studios said, okay, well, tape can be expensive. It's high maintenance. You gotta line the heads. You gotta adjust. Most of the time, you're only based on how you set the speed of the tape, so many inches per second. If you're running 15 versus 30 feet, inches per second or whatever, depending on how fast you're gonna go. Some people like to make the tape go real fast because they get higher clarity. But if you run it at a little bit slower, speed, you would get a lot more thickness from the tape, more tape saturation and all that. It depends, but you usually can get an extra song or two. Instead of getting about 3 songs, maybe getting 4 to 5 songs out of that tape. But tape, Ampex and all these different companies, it cost the tape, and then you can only record and re-record, and then they would have to cut the tape up because that's how you had to edit. That was, you'd put it on a razor blade, and they would take the tape and slice and move the tape around to move parts around. They would have to edit that way. So you had companies like Atari came out with their hard disk recording system. You had Alesis, Tascam, Fostex, and not everyone had a 24-track tape machine. Some people had 16-track tape machines. Some people had 8-track tape machines. And there's Fostex, there was Tascam, all these tape machines. And then and around the 90s, the hard disk recording system started becoming really, really popular. Because it starts saving, you can get more space, and you don't have to worry about, you didn't have to worry about cutting up your hard, whatever the case. It still didn't have the editing capability like you can in modern DAWs. Moving fast forward, as we move closer to the 2000, the millennium, right? So, early 2000, DigiDesign comes out with the Pro Tools system, but you had to buy their interface and their rig and everything. Computers weren't really using the type of, you had to get most of the time DAWs, they couldn't, early DAWs were mainly just MIDI only. You could do multi-track MIDI sequence, and they were really, it was the same concept of taking what you can do on synthesizers with 16-track sequencers on synthesizers, where you can quantize, edit, merge the track, duplicate the track, copy the track, build a song, and all this stuff on sequencers on computers. On synthesizers, digital synthesizers, but digital synthesizers at that time had limited hard drive space. The processing wasn't as good as modern synths, but you could see 16-track sequencers. So they just kind of moved that to make it a little more advanced, because you could sequence on computers, but they were just daunting, because one of the biggest things, this is one of the early systems, was simply, how did you save your stuff when you were sequencing? Floppies, which I still have, floppy disk. This was the standard of saving your files on a floppy, like this. Songs, it would have all the data for keyboards, if keyboards, how you would save all your tracks to a floppy. Even on your earlier PCs and Macs and stuff like that, was floppy disk. So, but Pro Tools wasn't the only DAW. You had, Atari had a DAW system. Cakewalk was pretty huge. There was Cubase, and there was Nuendo, and all these early DAWs. Back then, it was mostly MIDI. And then as the DAWs started, they started advancing the DAWs to start incorporating audio. But at that time, they needed to start building audio interfaces that could actually convert analog audio into digital information that the computer can understand, and then convert it back from digital back into audio. So it wasn't very good, the earlier systems. Um, so as you move forward, this stuff is advancing fast, and we're talking just in the beginning of the 90s. Because 80s and earlier, it was all analog consoles, pretty much 24 track tape machines, and outboard gear. That was your standard. And because you have a lot of engineers that came and started that way, like the Bob Clear Mountains, Dave Pensado, Andrew Sheps, Sylvia Massey, Quincy Jones, producers, Chris Lord Alge, Tom Lord Alge, his brother, all these engineers, and I'm just now scratching the surface of Bruce Swineen. Majority of all these Greg Wells, majority of these engineers that you've heard of started analog, tape machine way, because that's was the standard. The digital world and the audio interface and DAWs didn't exist. What we have today didn't exist 30 years ago. It in the 90s, most of the stuff is new. So moving forward, so a lot of recording studios say, okay, we got to have an alternative to tape, because technology was changing. Consoles were changing. They were coming out with digital consoles. Consoles started becoming popular, especially for live performance in the 90s. And so they needed to start coming up with systems. So the earlier DAWs really couldn't do what DAWs can do today. And then Cubase, along with Cakewalk and so forth, and then in digital design has created Pro Tools LE limited edition, but you still needed their system, their interface system and everything else. As DAWs really started getting more and more advanced as we move into the 2000s. Because once you start able to do audio, now we can record our vocals. We don't need a hard disk recorder or a tape machine. I can record onto the hard drive. It still wasn't very good. So Digital Design, with their brilliant marketing strategy, this is what made Digital Design brilliant, is you got NAMM shows, you have AES shows and things like this. They market in a way to make sure that all these commercial studios and recording schools if kids are gonna go to audio engineering school, they need to work on a system that's gonna need to be universal in all these recording studios. We're gonna need a system that they've learned on the school so they can go to work in commercial studios. This is when commercial studios were still at their peak. This is when record sales were still going at their peak, before the internet, because the internet was really not like it was in the 90s. And the internet didn't really start peaking until the early 2000s. So the internet's not even very old how we use it today. With YouTube. YouTube didn't really start kicking off until the early 2000s. Just like there was MySpace and all these earlier, and all these online internet sites that start popping up around the 2000s and later. So that's how they were able to become an industry standard. And this was just the standard. In other words, if you wanted to work in a commercial studio, you need to know how to use the DAW system. And because Digital Design came up with their interface and all that, and then Digital Design can no longer, with their financial issues and all that, they end up selling. Avid bought it. Avid took it over around 2000, 2001, 2002. Avid bought Pro Tools. And so moving forward, but Other DAW companies like Cakewalk was coming out with their Pro Audio. Then they start coming out with Sonar, Sonar Professional. Cubase kept increasing. Then you had Propeller Head Reason. They had their DAW. Fruity Loops, before they just started calling FL Studio, was actually what FL stands for. It still stands for Fruity Loops. They just call it FL Studio, Fruity Loop Studio. And then you had other DAWs that started coming up, like Personas came up with their Studio One in the 2000s, the early, the late 2000s, like 2008, 2009. Then here comes Studio One, and then here comes. Then we're getting into the other DAWs. Harrison Mixbus formed, Mixcraft, the new ones. What's the newest one now? Luna. And they just, DAW companies started, all these software people started engineering and writing DAW programs. And at the same time, you had pioneer companies like Waves that they decided to start making plug-in emulations of outboard gear around the 2000s, because DAWs couldn't use plugins. Early DAWs, there was no way you could use plugins. So with Pro Tools, instead of going with a VST, which is Virtual Studio Technology, they decided to go with AAX formatted system. So plugin companies had to come up with an AAX style. It's no different like if you come up with a format for PC and a format for Mac. So moving forward, now we have what we have now. Plugins have gotten better, and then all the PC and Macs went from 32-bit systems, which were a lot more limited system, to 64-bit systems, which is way more advanced in what we're using today in 64-bit systems. At the same time, everyone else started adapting as far as audio interfaces. Audio interfaces were not that good in the early 2000s. They were not that good. They were mediocre. They were, and I can attest to that because one of the first audio interfaces that I've ever bought, and it still works. And it still works fine. It's just it's an old audio interface, and that's my M Audio Omni Studio, which is in the rack here. That's one of the very first audio interfaces, and I bought it in 2003. So it is 22 years old. And the thing is, because it has the only thing with that interface is because of the converter chip, compared to like my Antelope Orion, which has way better converter chips. Even my I had some Behringer Firepower, which those came out in the mid 2016. Those FCA fire, even the Mark of the Unicorns one I got, or the other interfaces, a lot of these other interfaces, they have the better converter chips in them. And, the converter chips means is be able to, when your interface is bringing in analog data, it's sampling it to convert it into digital. And the better it can sample the converters to convert that analog signal to convert it into computer, the better it sounds when it's reconverted, when you're hearing it coming from their DAW. So all this advanced technology is shooting to what we have today, just within the last 15 years. Everything is just skyrocketing from your cell phones, your PC, your Mac, digital cameras. I mean, everything has accelerated in capability within the last 15 to 20 years. So you're talking 2005, anything older than that is just like dinosaurs, especially in the electronic world. Anything that starts at 2-3 years old is completely outdated. outdated in the electronic world because the technology has just skyrocketed. So getting to my point, because I'm very long-winded. People know me. It's already, let me put my glasses on. I can't see because I'm old. Okay, 30 minutes. So I'm getting to my point. Yes, if you look at it like that, Pro Tools was an industry standard because it was universal, because of recording studios. The thing is, within the last, there were only quite a few most popular big name artists realized when you got the money, you can build your own professional commercial type studio in your home. Mariah Carey has done it. Prince did it. George Duke did it. Whitney Houston did it. Van Halen did it. And I'm just naming a few out of thousands of artists that built their commercial studio. But for the independent, unknown artists, most artists didn't have the home or the space or anything like that to buy big name gear like a large console, high end AD to DA converters like Burroughs or the Avid or even Apollo, the high end Focusrite converters. And so most people could not afford that. As technology, especially with plug-in companies, as plug-in companies started booming within the last 15 years, we're talking FabFilter, Sound Toys, Isotope, Plug-in Alliance. Waze has been around for about 25 years, if not a little longer than that. But Slate Digital, and the list just goes on and on. Nomad Factory, Acoustica Audio, within the last 15 years. So with the industry starting to slow down with the record sales, and record labels really weren't making the money because people with Napster and all these pirating, torrent downloading, file sharing, downloading programs that was getting everyone where they were getting software and music and everything for free, even operating systems. They were file sharing and it became illegal because it was pirating. And then they would have programs that require like license where they would have, licensed crack programs that would crack a code that give you a code that will let you work in the system. They would these program software developers were making stuff like this. So at the same time as the industry started declining in the sales part, and gear just became more and more affordable, and you started making, because a lot of companies that were making the expensive stuff, well, the other companies were making competition gear at fractions of the cost, including cone companies like Warm Audio, Heritage Audio, Stam Audio. They would say, well, we can, you don't have to spend $3,000 on a Universal Audio 1176. Hairball Audio, so here's a do-it-yourself kit for like $500. You can go build you 1176, and it would work and sound pretty much like an actual Universal Audio 1176. So that became a boom, and then it just the same thing with microphones and compressors and EQs and all the rack gear. People start building clones. Everything's booming within the last 15 years. Everything is booming. And people realize I can buy an audio interface now, a few $100, get you anywhere from 2 to maybe even up to 8 channels of audio interface. They start putting better preamps in them. They start putting better converter chips. DAWs, computers became 64-bit systems. Everyone started choosing between PCs and Macs. You can go buy, people start saying, oh, I can buy plugins for, like, Waves would have sales, buy 6 plugins for like $29 or whatever. So people start seeing all this, start buying interfaces and all that. At the same time, a lot of people realize I can start doing this at home. And then some people would say, okay, well, not everyone wanted to buy into a Pro Tools DAW system, especially when you had a lot of other options. Ableton Live started becoming popular. FL Studio started becoming popular with some people. Reason Studio started becoming popular with people. People like me that stuck with Cakewalk. Then Studio One, people started using Studio One, and that started becoming popular. And all these all these different DAWs and how they adapted to use third-party plugins and so forth. And then all the other companies, because all people start buying different brand DAWs and their choices of audio interfaces, whether it was an Apollo Twin or an M Audio or a man, you name it. It could be the Behringer Euphoria. It could be a whatever. Even the most expensive ones, like the Lynx or the Antelopes or the Burrows or whatever. So people start buying that, and they started buying some outboard gear because they wanted to incorporate a little bit of analog flavor. And they knew how to, you said that in your routing, people learned how to do that in your routing, and people start building their recording studios, and mixing consoles started becoming less and less, and people started using more of the DAWs and buying themselves a studio desk, and everyone started doing this. And when everyone started buying gear and doing it at home, a lot more people realized I can just do this at home. Not everyone, realize you still have to have some experience and knowledge to do it. But the thing is, it became affordable to buy. With IK Multimedia, you can buy their Pro Studio, and a lot of these plugin companies and DAW companies and all that would have sales. You can buy Reaper for $60 and get a license. It's always updating. Buy Reaper for $60, and I can go buy a plugins bundle from one of these plugin companies for a couple of $100. My audio interface only cost me a couple of $100. I went and got me some studio monitors for a few $100. And then they picked them maybe a MIDI controller or maybe an MPC or something like that. And people just started doing this at home, and then as people really learned, they start watching, YouTube became YouTube University because of the internet. And when the pandemic hit, people slowed down going to commercial studios, which kind of, it's like that, it was, slowed down with people because of the restrictions. So it just became where, yeah, I can do this at home. I don't have to travel. I don't have to book. I don't have to worry about paying somebody, whatever the case. So all the people that are still used to the traditional way of doing everything are going to still make you think going to a commercial studio with the large console and outboard gear is the only way to go, because that's a money making for those commercial studios. Without artists and record labels and all that and making money that way, they can't make money. So a lot of these, once they came to the point where a lot of people slowed down, even the independent artists started slowing down booking. That's why you're starting to see recording studios closing. And because of that, and because people are picking whatever DAW they like, Pro Tools, as an example, is no longer becoming an industry standard, because people just don't need to go to commercial studios and be on one universal system anymore. So because of that, that's what's happening. And a lot of people realize, hey, I can do, some DAWs do way more than what Pro Tools can do. And then some DAWs can't do what Pro Tools can do. It becomes choice. So that's the breakdown of where we're at today. More and more people are deciding to learn and do this at home. And less people are deciding to go to commercial studios. Even though commercial studios do have their advantages when it comes to professional sound, especially one that's been around like United or Record Plant or, East West or a recording studio like that. Yes, they had an advantage because those studios were built for recording. But people are learning to mirror that if they're applying, people are learning to apply the same principles in their DAWs or in their homes. And now you can't even tell the difference with people that are good at what they're doing at home. You can't even tell the difference between if it was recorded in a commercial studio or if it's recorded at home now. And they're going to be the people that saying, well, there's always going to be the argument of people that are trying to say, well, clients and everything else. But you have to look at it like this. Most people are not building a studio in their home to bring in clients like Mariah Carey's. They're building their recording studios because they're doing their own personal projects and they don't need to pay $75 an hour or $100 an hour at a commercial facility to get the same results they can do at home. That's the key of it. Now, I'm not saying that everyone's going to get the same results because some people that are doing this at home don't know what it takes to get the same results. But what I'm saying is, the thing is, what's going to make what makes a person dangerous, and I'm not talking about dangerous in a dangerous way, is what makes a person can rival commercial studios when they are doing this at home and it sounds as good as a commercial studio. That's what makes these people, when they learn, I got to set up bus channels. I got to set up auxiliary channel. A lot of these plugins are sounding close to real outboard gear. Let me use these plugins properly. Let me set up these compressors properly, gates, delays, expanders. Let me set up my reverbs and delays, and let me set up auxiliaries and bus channels. And I'm doing all this within the DAW. And I've listened to quite a few YouTube channels where people that know what they're doing, and you hear what they're doing, and you listen to what they're doing, and it sounds just like if they're recording it sounds like if they're doing it in a commercial studio because they know what they're doing. So people can't use that excuse that, it won't sound as good at a commercial studio. The only really advantage to a commercial studio would be room reflections, and people not address that issue, and noise isolation, especially from outside noise, like maybe helicopters flying over or ambulance or fire trucks or police cars going by or just noisy neighbors or dogs barking or whatever. And then some people have to deal with maybe noise problems within their own home, like someone else is trying to watch TV in a different room, or kids, or the dog is barking, or the cat, or whatever. But a lot of people can overcome that, and some people don't. Like me, I'm fortunate to live in a very quiet neighborhood during the day and at night. It's hardly ever any noise. So that's what I'm saying about Pro Tools. In the end, used to be a standard DAW that everyone needed. And some people, because they adapted that, will stick with Pro Tools. Which Pro Tools is like, it's like, my take on it is like this. It's like any other DAW now. But DAWs were not like they are today. Every DAW has advanced in the way it's advanced between Ableton Live, Cubase, Mixcraft, Harrison Mixbus, Cakewalk, Reaper, FL Studio, Nuendo, Cubase, and so forth. Every DAW has progressed in the way that they can pretty much all do what you need to do in that DAW, because most people do not need to go to a commercial studio anymore. That's the only reason why Pro Tools is no longer becoming the industry standard anymore, because most people just don't need to. They can pick whatever and it will work if they know what they're doing. So the controversy about, there's still a big controversy, and people that are they're trying to say, it's the same thing with people that do not, they think, it's, how can I say this? It's like some people that are stuck with just doing music as a band. There are a lot of people that feel that the only way you can make music is with a band. They don't think you can make music any other way. And that is a very limited thinking, because there are people that can do full-fledged, there are people that not just can, there are people that are doing full-fledged productions on MPCs or just with virtual instruments. They're using just all digital software. And a lot of this is being heard on, because there's so many different genres. There's trap music, there's EDM music, there's electronic music, techno music, there is hip hop music, there's jazz, there's R&B, there's rock, there's country, there is orchestrator music. There's so many, and some of this, and there's people that are making movies for scores, making music for movies, and so forth. And a lot of people are using software to do that, even for movies. All the special effects and sound effects and all that is coming from, a lot of that's coming from software on a PC or Mac. So I would say all the people that's going to argue that, that the analog, recording the band with the analog console and the outboard gear in a commercial studio is still, and I'm like this, there's nothing wrong with people that want to still record that way. They still want to play in a band. They still want to record on the console and use outboard gear in a commercial studio and continue to make music that way. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. All of it's good. All of it can be good. But there are people that where it becomes a problem is when people think that that's music is the only good music. And, whether it's, we're talking about whether it's the 70s, 80s, or whatever, and they think that's the only good music ever, and everything else is just crap. And I'm like, I just shake my head, because that's really a shame. Because, even the 90s R&B was mostly sequenced music with modern digital synthesizers, and that was done with some of the DAWs. Such as what Teddy Riley was using, or Jimmy Jam. Those guys were using digital audio workstations, sequencing music, and using modern synthesizers, and that's how you would come up with, like, even though they were still routing a lot of that through their consoles, whether it was a Euphonics or a Neve console, whatever, but a lot of that was sequenced on computers. Then the music was then recorded onto tape, and then they would signal and mix through a console. But now everything is pretty much moving more and more to where you can do everything in the box, meaning in the computer. That's becoming a standard. And it's like anything else. I look at it like this: as people, and I'll close it out like this because it's a long video. This It's no different than with people that thought the carburetor on cars was going to be forever. And they realized once computers got really good and been able to control fuel injected systems better and make cars way more efficient, more powerful, more reliable, and everything else, carburetors are pretty much non-existent except for in certain circumstances. Other than that, carburetors are pretty much non-existent. Everything's pretty much fuel injected. And with electrical vehicles, it's the new future. Pretty much everything's gonna be electric vehicles. That's gonna be a standard. So it's inevitable. You can't stop it whether you like it or not. Same way with me, whether I like it or not, because I like gasoline cars. I can't stop people moving into electric vehicles. It's starting to become a normal thing. So it's the same thing with software and plugins and digital audio workstations and doing it at home. That's going to be a normal thing because artists are going to start doing their people are not going to, need to sign record contracts and go with record labels and get sucked up into a 360 deal anymore because of the marketing of the internet. Now, once we get the internet figured out so it's not ridiculously oversaturated and artists can actually be seen so they can get the publicity, that's what we need to work on. So that way, but that's the norm now, even for artists and producers and everything else, to do this at home and market themselves instead of just being signed a contract and then getting suckered on, and they give you 10,000 reasons why they're taking all your majority of your money. And they, but that's because we're going to market you and we're going to put you on the radio and we're going to make, video support and tour support. Now, all these things, when an artist, as an independent artist, can do this themselves now. They just, an artist / producer, all that, just have to do the work themselves now, even though it can become expensive. So that's how I look at it with the whole, that's why Pro Tools is no longer becoming an industry standard, because you don't need commercial studios as much anymore. So I'm done with the video because it's almost an hour. I just wanted to throw another, because I'm pretty much done with the topic after this. But that's pretty much it. So thanks for watching, and y'all have a great one.